Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called The Fabelmans.
Awesome. Capture every moment. A coming-of-age story about a young man's discovery of a shattering family secret and an exploration of the power of movies to help us see the truth about each other and ourselves. Sounds pretty promising. The Fabelmans is Steven Spielberg's latest movie, 2022, has an all-star cast, Michelle Williams, Paul Dano, Seth Rogen, and Gabriel LaBelle, who I don't recognize, but this kid, I'd say, knocks it out of the park. He kind of like plays the teenager who's getting into films. I mean, this is kind of an autobiography of Steven Spielberg's life, right? Like, loosely, it's fictionalized a bit, but it's like this is his stuff. And I've seen this.
He specifically said in interviews that this is drawn heavily from his own life. It's heavily autobiographical, obviously with changed names, slightly changed details, but like all the wide, broad strokes, it's drawn from his life.
And I think the one quote I saw from him was that it's a loving but critical point of view, like of his upbringing, of his family. Like I assume that his parents actually got divorced in real life, and like this is his movie, kind of talking about that. But and his parents passed away within the past 5 years, which I think kind of got him going and kind of motivated him to make like a tribute to them, essentially. From what I could see, he had the idea for this movie like back in the late 90s, and they started writing it in about 2019 or 2020. And here we are in 2022 being hit with this movie. It had a really brief theatrical run. It came out, I think, at the end of November, and then hit like video on demand streaming services by the like mid-December. And so it's like, normally I kind of like to talk about the box office, but I feel like it's completely irrelevant here because it's just movies don't have the same time in the box office anymore. It's like those are becoming less and less relevant for their numbers there.
Yeah, we do it a disservice because I think if this had a wider release, kind of back in the old school typical theater release days before, the before times, before COVID changed the entire landscape, we'd be talking a different game. But like, I don't think the box office in this case really speaks to the quality of the film.
No, and this is Spielberg we're talking about here as well. This guy is a titan in the movie industry, and he's kind of pioneered a lot of the modern day blockbuster, obviously with something like Jurassic Park making huge waves and like huge box office numbers.
The term itself, blockbuster, originated with Jaws. Jaws was literally, man invented, he was the father of blockbuster filmmaking, for good or ill. We define it, but Jaws was the one. This was the man who started blockbuster filmmaking.
Right.
His impact on the industry, on our culture at large, I don't think can be understated at this point.
We didn't really talk about it beforehand, but like, obviously Spielberg, like this guy's played a major factor in our movie journey.
Well,
when we
essentially,
were
I think
kids, right?
We've talked about it before, right? Like, essentially, this like Steven Spielberg like directed and or produced our entire childhoods.
Yeah. Is there? And I don't want to delve too far into his filmography here. Like, are there any massive standouts that like are particularly like important to you or like memorable for any reason? Like maybe some of the first ones you could remember seeing.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be too far off the main trail of Spielberg stuff. You and I were talking earlier. I just watched Jaws again last night with my daughter. Jaws is going back into one of his earlier films. I think it's like his third feature film, I think.
Yeah.
But it's one of my comfort films. It's odd, but Jaws is one of my comfort films. When I'm feeling down or when I'm feeling stressed, I watch Jaws and I just feel it picks me up again. Partially it's because it's like the story is just, it's a perfect story, perfectly told. I'm just like, there's so many memorable shots like that. I know that zoom in, that dolly zoom in of Brody on the beach during that shark attack. that shot, or when the boat's leaving and it's silhouetted in the jaws of the shark from Quint's window there. It's like little things like that, or Quint's whole speech about the USS Indianapolis pure cinematic magic, and it's just a dude talking, monologuing in the belly of a ship. Obviously, growing up with the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah, that trilogy in the 80s was just massive.
Yeah, it was huge back when we had trilogies and not entire franchises. But that was a collaboration between two greats. It was Spielberg and George Lucas. Obviously, you mentioned Jurassic Park, which at the time was it 93? I think
93
it came out.
Yep.
That was a phenomenon in terms of blockbuster storytelling, but in terms of like special effects and everything. And like you look at the movie now, and like it's amazing how well those effects still hold up. But just like that sense of childlike wonder, which is one of the staples of Spielberg's filmmaking. Love that. Obviously, grew up with Hook as well, which a lot of people don't love for some. I found out recently. I think you and I we're in the minority in this one, but we both love Hook. Yeah, like the retelling of the Peter Pan story. I grew up with that one. With Robin Williams. Amazing. Some of the other ones that stood out for me. I remember Minority Report.
Oh yeah.
Sci-fi adventure. That one still, I think that was really underappreciated at the time.
Well, I really liked his like sci-fi trilogy there. It felt like just around like when he sort of took over artificial intelligence after Kubrick passing. He directed that, and it was like, oh, it was a crazy world, interesting movie. Minority Report, and then a few years later, War of the Worlds, classic sci-fi.
Another one, War of the Worlds, I watched it for the first time, I think, last year or the year before.
That was your first time?
Yeah. I picked it up. I got it on 4K as a gift, and I love that movie. People, for some reason, thought it was like, oh, it was always like a lesser Spielberg, and I was like, this movie's great. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Some recent ones, because the guy's still on fire. This is the thing. People keep saying, like, you got critics out there saying like, oh, Spielberg's lost it. He's old. He's out of touch. But then you got stuff like, I love Bridge of Spies. The Post was great. I still haven't seen West Side Story, but then and then the Fabelmans. Maybe spoilers here about our ratings, but like, Fabelmans was great as well. This guy is still, I don't know, he's in his 70s now, 70s or 80s, but this dude is on fire. He's like Scorsese. He's just got this magic touch. There's a timelessness or agelessness to his filmmaking that still feels like he, even in his 70s, Spielberg can still, through film, capture that essence of childlike wonder and bring you along for the ride as an audience member in a way that really no other filmmaker has or can. Those are some of my favorites. But what are some of your favorites, Brian? Anything I haven't mentioned that stood out to you you talk about his films as a pantheon. I think that's fair.
Yeah, it's a thing where it's like you rattled off pretty much all of them. The only one, which I think might be one of his best films, E.T., of course, was just probably the first one movie either one of us had ever seen. Even Indiana Jones throughout the 80s. Jurassic Park, I think, is the first movie I'd seen 3 times in the theater. And I was only 12 years old at the time. It's just like that movie was so huge.
It was so hyped, but I don't think people realize like some of these movies, like Jurassic Park was massive. It was everywhere. People were talking about it. The special effects blew us. Even though, like, looking back now, what is it? The dinosaurs were only on screen for like 12 minutes out of the runtime or something total. But those 12 minutes stood out more in my mind than the hours in the new like Jurassic World movies. In a way that, just like you can't forget that stuff. It was just so iconic.
And of course, another one, huge film, Saving Private Ryan.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. It was still one of the all-time great World War II movies. Oh, and of course, like Schindler's List, a very important movie for a lot of reasons. Yeah,
and I'll admit I still haven't watched that movie.
Okay,
maybe 2023 will be the year of Schindler's List.
I'm not going to make fun of you because there's still a couple glaring omissions on my part in my Spielberg filmography. I haven't seen Lincoln yet.
Well, this is the thing that I wanted to talk about here is that I feel like he made a lot of big movies, really excellent movies that I had watched time and time again. And after Munich, there was a lot of his movies I'd never revisit and I just miss entirely. After Munich, you've got that fourth Indiana Jones movie, which I have seen a couple times, Crystal Skull, but universally derided and probably not nearly as bad as we all want it to be.
It's fine. It's not one of his best ones for sure, but it's still a fine movie.
I hadn't seen The Adventures of Tintin. I haven't seen War Horse.
Oh, Adventures of Tintin. I'm still waiting on a sequel for that. Amazing. One of the best CG movies ever.
Did you see War Horse after that?
I have not. That's another blind spot for me. I haven't seen War Horse yet.
And then there was Lincoln, which I remember seeing, and just Lincoln is one of these perfect encapsulations of a movie, like a drama that's just so well put together, really well acted, really great. I have zero intention of ever watching it again. I feel kind of bad about that, but there's a whole world of movies that are like 4.5 or 5-star films that I just don't need to revisit.
Yeah.
Bridge of Spies, I haven't seen that one either.
Oh, really? It's really good. It's another, I think later Spielberg is a little bit more like understated and not like over the top and not as ostentatious. But I think Bridge of Spies really worked. That's the first time really I remember. I've probably seen him before, but Mark Rylance, and I think he's really become really big in the popular consciousness these days for good reason. The guy's a really good actor, but I don't remember seeing him in anything before Bridge of Spies, which I'm positive he's had a long and fruitful career before that.
Now since you like recognize him, you'll probably watch some older movies that he's just going to be in everything. Yeah. After Bridge of Spies, he does BFG. Love that book as a kid. I did see this in the theater with my family. And I think it's probably going to be one of the lowest rated Spielberg movies. I don't remember being that good, but he gets back into drama with The Post. You mentioned that. An excellent movie. And then I have to talk about the next movie, 2018, Ready Player One, which historically speaking here, this is a movie that I think got us into the idea that we need to start recording our conversations about movies, because both you and I watched this. We got back to your place, and for an hour straight, we just threw dirt at this movie for an hour straight, right?
I think I can safely say it's my least favorite Spielberg movie.
And after that conversation, it's just like, where was the microphone for that? Like, that was a podcast episode right there. So maybe sometime down the road, we'll have to revisit Ready Player One. And of course, more recently, West Side Story, which I think I'm still looking to watch the first one before I watch this one.
I want to watch the original. I have it on my shelf. I bought the special edition. It was on sale for $10 at a Shoppers Drug Mart for some reason. But I've been trying to expand my movie tastes and watch some more genres that I wouldn't normally watch, like musicals specifically. And I keep doing this to myself. Like, I put it off, but then I watch something like Sweeney Todd and it's like, it's a musical. I don't want to watch it. And I watch it. Amazing movie. Loved it. And then I was like, I got a couple of musicals on my shelf that I haven't seen yet. I was like, no, but I don't know. So right. It's weird. I have this weird mental block, maybe because as a kid, like my mom made us watch all these musicals. And so I just like naturally, I start to probably like that kind of rebellious kid mentality that I haven't grown out of yet, that I need to kind of mature that part of my brain. But yeah, I want to watch the first West Side Story before the Spielberg remake, because the remake is supposed to be amazing. But of course it's a Spielberg film with a few exceptions, like Ready Player One. Spielberg is like, he is the safest bet. And even Ready Player One, my least favorite Spielberg, it's still not an absolutely terrible movie.
No, it's still well crafted. I mean, it looks amazing. It is an action thriller ride. It's just,
there was an irony to that movie that I think they missed.
So I got to test your Spielberg knowledge here with some guesses. Can you give me the top 3 highest rated Spielberg films as per Letterboxd? So Letterboxd works on a 5-star rating scale, and this would be the average score, the absolute top 3 movies.
Highest rated? Let's say Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That's number 3.
Oh, is it? Okay, Jurassic Park?
Nope.
E.T.?
Nope.
Oh, really?
Jurassic Park is 4. E.T. is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
I don't know what the other ones would be then.
We did mention them a few minutes ago.
Is Ready Player One of the top rated ones?
No, I don't even see it on my screen right now. It's too far down the list.
I don't know. Minority Report? Is there Pleasantly Surprised?
No.
Or the other 2 Indiana Jones movies?
The Temple of Doom is sorry, The Last Crusade is up there. I got the posters mixed up there. Temple of Doom is like one of the lowest rated ones.
Oh wait, Jaws then. Yeah, Jaws has to be on there.
It's not in the top 3 average. No.
Not in the top 3 average. What?
So I'll just hit you with number 2 is Saving Private Ryan.
Oh yeah, okay.
And you're gonna hit your forehead on this one. The number 1 is Schindler's List, of course.
Oh yeah. No, in terms of not just filmmaking, but in terms of like cultural impact and the importance of that story, yeah, that 100%. Yeah, that makes sense.
I won't go into the bottom 3, but give me the bottom feature film from Spielberg, lowest average rating.
Like for me, it would be Ready Player One. But I'm gonna guess that people picked the 4th Indiana Jones movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
100%, yeah. And to give you an idea of how low of a rating that is, and I say low with quotes because that has an average rating on Letterboxd of 2.6, which is by all standards a mediocre movie, not a bad movie. Yeah, and I think that's just kind of a testament to how good Spielberg's movies are. That all of them are good. Like they're just all good, really. And I mean, there's certain appeals to others, more so to some people than others, but they're all excellent movies. And with that, we got to jump into The Fabelmans because this is pretty highly rated. This is an average on Letterboxd right now of 4.1, which puts it in the top 5 of the highest average Spielberg movies on Letterboxd, which is might have a little bit of recency bias in there because it's only been out for a couple months now. But this movie, you're going to see this in the Best Picture list in the Oscars. I think it's already up for Best Picture in a Golden Globe. You might see some acting stuff out of this as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if Spielberg walks away with Best Director on this for the Oscars.
Well, they do tend to love movies about Hollywood. Hollywood does tend to love movies about Hollywood, so I wouldn't.
That's it exactly, right? It's just this movie, I mean, it's Spielberg as a kid. Like it's showing isn't the first scene essentially his parents bringing him to the movie's The Greatest Show on Earth, I think.
Yeah, the movie, it is not subtle. It's like one of the first lines from Michelle Williams is, movies are like dreams you never forget, which is a great line, but it's like, it's not subtle at all.
And it was, I mean, that whole thing was fantastic. And it's just like the worry that like the audiences are seeing like this train wreck and it's just like, it's so real. The special effect is so real. And he wants to go home and like recreate this. And his mom is telling him, if we record this, you don't have to ruin your toys. Like we can't pay for new toys every time. Why don't you record it with this camera? And then he could just rewatch it later over and over again. And he just basically, number one, he gets really careful with his toys, so he's wrecking it without destroying them to create this special effect. And then he gets into, well, if I edit this properly, it's going to be even better. And he's just like a 12-year-old kid or something at this time. It was just, it was really neat. And then it just sort of shows the next few years. I mean, it doesn't jump too far in the future, I think. I think he's like, how old is he at the end? Like 16, 17? He's in the late teens.
Yeah, like he just finishes high school, right? Because one of the last scenes is him having that movie. Like I think it's a high school graduation, isn't it? Or it's a prom or whatever.
It's the end of high school, and he's filming. He's filming what the school calls a ditch day, which just looks like an excuse for the entire like graduating class, I think, to like run out to the beach for the day and participate in games and tomfoolery. So they need a photographer, and he's got an eye for cinema, and he's recording all the events and pieces it all together to make that film. Previous to that, like he makes a couple films. What was the first one he made with the Boy Scouts?
Boy Scout troops. Yeah, the Western movie.
The Western, that's right.
Where they're having the shootout, and he does like some of the stuff is so simple, but like he's watching it, and he's like, there's no muzzle flashes on the gunfight seems like super flat and stale. Yeah. But when he shows it to everybody, and like, to his little audience of like fellow Boy Scouts and his parents and everything, like there's flashes in the muzzles as they're shooting, have their shootout, and his dad like leans over like, how did you do that? And he's like, oh, just like I poked holes in the film so the light would shine through. And it's like, and his dad was like, who was not, he was more like the kind of practical. He's like wants him to go to school, wasn't like negative, but was more realistic about like he wasn't supporting the creative side of him. He's like, no. He's supporting like, oh, go be an engineer or a scientist, make get a solid living and make a contribution. But his dad, who was an engineer, is like, even that at that point is like, he was impressed. He was like, oh man, it's like, that's really smart. And it's like, as an audience member, it's like, you think, of course, limited funds. It's like, yeah, you poke a hole in the film with for a frame or two where the muzzle of the gun is, and you get like a poor man's special effect. Was like that's the kind of like creative thinking that, like simple stuff like that of course that makes Spielberg the genius, and I'm just the guy talking about Spielberg.
Well, they really depict like his father is an engineer, like he's working on computers. I mean, they show punch cards at one point, which is really neat. Like, he's on like the cutting edge of some technology, and his mother is a more creative type, and you basically see just the funnels go through creative, engineer, practical into one kid. This kid's got them both, right? Like he can take advantage of the technology, and he's taking advantage of his creative background through his mother as well.
Well, the father, played by Paul Dano,
Yes.
Who's like, this is the thing, I keep seeing Paul Dano in roles like in Prisoners or as the Riddler, as these kind of weirdos, and he's got a very unique look to him, right?
Yeah.
But then like you see him play this role as essentially Spielberg's father, Steven Spielberg's father, or the proxy, Mr. I can't remember what his name is, Mr. Fabelman,
Mr. Bert Fabelman.
And he's like, oh no, this guy is like, there's so much untapped potential, I think, with Paul Dano.
Oh, he's a great actor.
But I think because he's got a very unique like physical presence and a very unique look, that maybe he gets kind of typecast as like a character actor. But I think I'm looking forward to see. I want to see Paul Dano like in a lead role in a movie. I hope he gets that shot to really be front and center. Like even in this one, it's just so many amazing nuances in the role where like, obviously Spielberg is a little bit biased as he's telling this story. But I was really surprised though, like how many warts he did show in the story. Like he was really honestly putting some stuff up on screen, like depicting like his, like Mrs. Fabelman, Michelle Williams in the movie had ended up having an affair and leaving the father to go live with Seth Rogen's character, who's like really close family friend, like it's an uncle. Assuming that that's based, it was all based loosely on Spielberg's life. It's like that takes a certain level of chutzpah to put that kind of family history up on a screen willingly, and to tend to share that and work through that in a very public forum. Right? Whereas like most people might not be comfortable maybe sharing that level of like or airing the family's dirty laundry in that way. Not that he was airing. That makes it sound kind of lurid, and it wasn't lurid at all in the movie. But just saying like, here's this giant big, the father of blockbuster cinema, coming with this like really intimate film, really amazing. Spielberg coming out and showing them how it's done. It's like, oh, you want like small, intimate, like indie style filmmaking? Boom, got you covered there too.
Yeah. So the mother name is Mitzi, played by Michelle Williams. Is she one of the best actresses of our generation right now, or what? Like,
it's so strange thinking back to her origins on Dawson's Creek of all places, and to think that one of the I'm not throwing shade at Dawson's Creek actors. They're all great actors in their own right. But just to think is like, it's always, you never know like what trajectory people's careers are going to take. And I didn't watch Dawson's Creek thinking, oh, Michelle Williams is going to be one of the biggest, she's one of the best talents of our generation, partially because you watch something like Dawson's Creek and it's a teen soap opera essentially. Yeah. So it's got, the actors have to work kind of within those confines so that you don't really see what their full extent, what they can do. But since then, like Michelle Williams has gone on to be, one of the greatest talents, acting talents of her generation. I remember, I think the first real movie that I saw her in, was it Blue Valentine maybe? It was also depressing as heck. But like watching her like essentially during her kind of her renaissance, I guess.
Yeah.
But ever since then, amazing film work. Yeah.
And obviously Paul Dano is playing the father there. Bert and the friend who Mitzi is essentially having an affair with throughout the movie is played by Seth Rogen. His name is Benny. I feel like there would be a little apprehension with casting Seth Rogen. I am not a Seth Rogen hater, but I think there's a lot of them out there. Is that fair to say? Like there's...
I'm going to be honest here. When Seth Rogen kind of first came on the scene and when he first started his turn as like leading movies as opposed to just being the lovable sidekick, it took me a long time for Seth Rogen to grow on me.
Yeah.
But in recent years, I've come to appreciate his talents a lot more. And like in this movie, he gave such a for him, like a subdued, really subtle performance. Like, and you see like, oh, of course, like Spielberg is a master of working with actors to bring out their best. Also, like Seth Rogen's been doing this for a while now, where he's been honing his craft. But like to see him in this, it's a there's some comedy to the role, but there's a lot of gravitas to that role too. There's some serious stuff going on where he's having at least an emotional affair, if not a physical affair, with the kid's mom.
That's the thing. I do really love his performance. I think I've always kind of appreciated Seth Rogen. I mean, the comedies are great. He's done some other more serious roles, and he's really good. And like Spielberg is not going to cast someone who's not going to be able to do the job here. And Spielberg does bring out the best in him, I think. And I love that. Like he is kind of like the lovable, fun uncle in this movie.
Yeah.
But he's also deeply in love with Mitzi, and they're having this thing. And yeah, it may not be physical, but there's definitely like an emotional connection here. And you get to see like in the background of some of the scenes, and especially the camp scene there where Sammy's the son, doing all the filming, and then just like he accidentally catches them on camera, like, you know, canoodling with each other and like disappeared into the
holding hands or like little things like that. And like it makes me wonder too, like doing research, like is that how Spielberg found out about his mom's affair? Was like literally editing a family film? Like how close to the mark actually was that, right? Like
yeah, that's entirely possible, which is pretty brutal. But it like in the movie, it's just like it's such a smart way to bring about one of the themes of the films there, where it's just like, oh, we can edit around that because his dad wants him to edit the movie, the camp movie, because his mother just recently lost her mother, so she's sad and depressed, and it's like, well, maybe this will help a little bit, put all that movie to film, and we're going to watch it. And like he discovers the stuff captured, and he just edits around that, and you're like, oh, like I think at that point he's realizing like the real power of cinema, and especially editing films. Like you can depict people in ways that are not necessarily accurate to how they are in real life. You can edit out all their misgivings and all the negative parts of them and make something else entirely. Like you have so much control over what people see and understand about somebody. And even a home movie becomes characters on screen. They're not necessarily the people you're filming, which it was really neat. And then of course that really pays off later on in the movie where he makes that high school film and he's depicting I don't remember the name. I call him the older bully.
The high school bully there, yeah.
He's almost like a Greek god in Sammy's movie. And then the younger bully is depicted as absolute trash, right? It's just like nothing redeemed, like showing all his shortcomings. And when that older bully like confronts him, it's just like why would you do that? Like why would you show me in that way? Because he's wrestling with himself and wrestling with the fact that he is not a perfect guy, and you just depicted him as a perfect dude. He's like, he knows he's a bully, trying to come to terms with that himself. And of course the younger one just goes absolutely nuts anyway, as he would. But that was a really good, solid theme throughout the movie. I thought it was really good. That culmination of that last scene was great.
I like too that with that bully scene at the end there, where he's like, on the film, and he's like, comes to him and is like, there's a little bit of a reconciliation, but it's not the cliched. I was like, oh, we're best friends now. It's like, no, it's like
there's an understanding,
a little bit of an understanding, but showing that power of film, like to affect people and to question themselves and their life, and to like really like the film was really focused on the young Spielberg, young Fabelman,
Sammy,
the Sammy, and the power of filmmaking. and it seems to be like the power of filmmaking for Spielberg always is on a very personal, very intimate level. There's maybe a bit of an irony there coming from somebody who is like the master of blockbuster filmmaking, but you go back and think like, like E.T., Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, they're always focused on these very like human moments, right? Like one of my favorite scenes, I think, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is still my favorite Indiana Jones movie, but there's a scene at the end between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones and his father, where like he's like the temple where the Grail is held is all crumbling around, and his dad is holding Indiana Jones by the hand, but Indiana Jones trying to reach out and get the Grail, and then he looks at him as like Indiana. It's the first time he called him by his chosen name. He looks up at him, and there's this connection between the father and son. And it's like, let it go. And it's like in the middle of these big blockbuster films, is always like these personal connections, human moments. And I think that if you look back over his filmography, I think the Fabelmans is also meant to be it's autobiographical about his personal life, but it's looking back on it's reminiscing about his entire career as well. And like, well, what does it all mean, right? And I think a lot of filmmakers are doing this now. They're in that phase of their careers. You look at Scorsese doing the same thing. You look at Kevin Smith with Clerks 3 doing the same thing, where he's looking back over his career. Scorsese with The Irishman, looking back over his career with other themes in there as well. And for Spielberg, the power of cinema seems to be in his thesis. It's that connection on a personal level, that emotional affect on that personal level, which is, maybe some people lose that in all the blockbusterness, but I think it's a fair assessment of his movies, where it is mostly character driven, and you have all these like human beats that really make these movies stand out.
It kind of reminds me of when we were talking about the Adam Project last year, where there was some humanity behind it that we pointed out as it was almost like, oh my goodness, for a huge blockbuster, like $200 million movie, it's like you miss a lot of those moments, and that's it. It's like that's the Spielberg factor, is those moments are always going to be in his movies. That's why those old blockbusters stand out. It's exactly moments like that a lot of modern movies, for whatever reason, they just don't include those moments. That it's just like, oh, you know what, instead of that, it's just going to be like a quippy line that's going to get a quick joke out of the audience or something. It's just like there's still a lot of emotional resonance hitting between the characters and in the scenes.
I think the difference is a lot of modern filmmakers, I think they're using spectacle as an end unto itself, where Spielberg, even in his most kind of bombastic movies, he's using spectacle to tell a deeper story, like something like Minority Report, which we talked about or we mentioned briefly before. Big special effects sci-fi movie dealing with some sci-fi what ifs, like what if you could tell the future and prevent crime, but it's all hinging on this story of this man and his family and them trying to get over the loss of their child. And that's what makes the movie. It's that emotional core, that human core that we can relate to, even without being parents. You can relate to that human emotion of loss and feeling helpless in the face of that loss. That really ties all the bombastic sci-fi stuff together, or really, like all the sci-fi stuff and action sequences were in service of that theme. Where I think that maybe that gets lost in some more modern blockbusters, where you're saying is like, oh, instead of a human connection, somebody's going to break the tension with a quippy line, like the criticism. I think a legitimate criticism level at a lot of Marvel movies, where I think it's like, oh, it's the spectacle that people are coming to see. We're like, no, the spectacle is part of it, but the spectacle has to be in service of some deeper exploration of the human condition, which is why you've seen someone like Spielberg be so successful for 50 years now, more than 50 years. I can't remember when Duel came out. Was that his first movie or was it one before that? But like, that's the reason, is that human connection. I think for him to be, so explicit about that in the Fabelmans, to be aware of it, you realize like this did not happen by chance. That's how he builds his movies. That's how he tells his stories. It was really interesting to see essentially the Fabelmans offering almost a sneak peek into Steven Spielberg's mind and his creative process.
Well said.
It was really interesting. One of the characters, his crazy uncle there, when his grandmother dies, played by.
Oh yes, this guy. I recognize him.
He's in so many things, and I feel bad for not knowing his name. But you know this actor when you see him. He's in so much stuff.
Judd Hirsch.
Yeah, so Uncle Boris, played by Judd Hirsch. Thank you, Brian. This character came in, and again, it's got to be either based on a real character or real person rather in Spielberg's life, or maybe a pastiche of several people. But when he comes in and stays with them for, was it like a night or a couple nights, just for the funeral of Sammy's grandmother, his Uncle Boris's sister, and he gives him that speech about you got to choose between. You're a creative person. You're an artist. Eventually, you're gonna have to choose between your art and your family, right? Like you can't. Yeah. You have that compulsion within you. I can tell. You can't have it both, right? You gotta. There's gonna be sacrifices you're gonna make along the way. And of course, this is with Spielberg reflecting back on his life. I think going through relationships. I think he went through a divorce early on before he married Kate Capshaw after Temple of Doom. Understanding if you have a passion, and if you're going to follow that passion, it's going to require sacrifice. And it was, again, not super subtle. The messaging was it's all up on screen, but the performances from these actors, especially who's the guy who plays Sammy?
Gabriel LaBelle.
Gabriel LaBelle.
Fairly new to the scene. From what I could see, he was in The Predator and that a movie called Dead Shack. But this kid's got a bright future. Starring in a Spielberg film and holding his own against veterans like Michelle Williams and Paul Dano and everything. And it's just this kid is going places. But that whole scene was great. And he was only in there, Judd Hirsch, that is, only for a single scene, but it was so impactful. And that's the great thing too. Even the smallest characters in this film leave this huge impact, and they're each given the little something to do, right? Even his high school, the friends, but also the bullies, his first love there, the girlfriend there. And he's obviously inspired by Spielberg. So Sammy's family is Jewish, and he falls in love and starts dating this very hardcore Christian girl. And there's some humor kind of out of that Spielberg finds. Well, it's a great spot in the film because it injects that humor that is probably needed because the affair is coming to light. He is basically confronted his mother sort of about that, so they both kind of know about it at that point, I think, right? Yeah, and I love the way he confronts her too is through film. All the parts he cut out for his father, he edited them together, and his mom is sitting in the closet, watching this film, and so it's even from a young age, Spielberg's stand-in is I express myself through the medium of film. That's how I express my emotions, is through film, even in intimate family interactions like that. Right. So you have a little bit of a humor injected through that, but also, Bert is moving his entire family to California for his job, and because IBM, right? Did they say it explicitly or just kind of presumed it? I'm not sure, but he's moving there. Yeah. And because they're Jewish, they're being Sammy's being bullied in high school. It becomes a big problem. And it's just this becomes the anti-Semitism. Yeah. Yeah. It was just so you have a lot of that thrown in there too. And it's just that was really sobering too, because you think that stuff is kind of in the past, especially anti-Semitism. You think we've learned our lessons after World War II and the Holocaust, but you see it rearing its ugly head again. And you think even someone as powerful and as successful as Steven Spielberg, he's still facing anti-Semitism. He must feel really, it makes you feel small and powerless when you have that hate leveled against you. Right. And to have that, to highlight that in the movie too, was really powerful and really prescient based on today's political landscape, unfortunately. without a doubt. And I got to comment on like the filming equipment he has here, because when I was a kid, my family would rent a VHS video camera every so often, mainly for like different Christmases and birthdays and stuff. And it's like, oh, like even back in the 50s and 60s here, like they're doing these big, reel to reel tapes and reels, and just like filming everything. It was really neat.
No sound though.
No sound. Yeah, but that's the thing. They wanted his first Western there in the Boy Scouts was like a silent film. And I think even the war movie he makes afterwards is also silent, if I remember correctly.
It was, yeah, with all he would play, who had like literally a record player and playing music at the same time he was showing these movies, right?
I really like that. And then also in the war movie, like that's the point where he knew he needed like acting, like he needed emotion to come across on screen.
It was a great scene.
It was almost like a retelling of his first acting direction to like the main actor. And the guy is just kind of like, what are you telling me to do here? And it was just like really, I don't know who that guy is, or I kind of wish they would follow up on him. It's like, did he go and do like have a big career after that? Because like he's talking about, is like, you got to be like kind of like sad here or whatever. Like you got to have this emotion, but we're going to like shoot you from behind. And the movie is showing you that as he's walking through like this battlefield with all these bodies everywhere, like the actor, like he starts crying, right? And he's just like, he's walking through. That doesn't necessarily come across on screen, but it would show up in his body language from behind, because Sammy's filming him from behind and just letting him walk through. And it's just like, even stuff like that, the minute details that as 13 or 14-year-old kid, he has an eye for right there. And it's just like, that would be such a game changer in his films moving forward.
It was really interesting. Essentially, Steven Spielberg giving us this like behind the scenes look at his directing process, where he's like, young Sammy Fabelman is giving this actor directions. I'm like, oh, essentially, like, how do you get that emotional response? Like, oh, he's providing this context. Like, oh, you went through here. It was a victory. You're walking away, but like, you led your entire squad to death. They're all dead because of you. And so he gives him this kind of backstory and this context, and you see the change. Like you said, this actor who played this guy in the movie was really, really good too, where you see the change come over him, and he realizes like all the stuff that Fabelman has been telling him gets to him, and he gets the performance out of this guy, and is like, that okay, that's really interesting to see. Essentially, Spielberg showing us how he directs and how he elicits different emotional responses from actors. Just besides it being a personal story, it was also, as somebody who loves not just movies, but also like the background, how movies are made, to get that. It was just fascinating. Even that first opening dialogue from his father when they take him to see the movie the first time, and he explains to him how the movie projector works. Yeah. Oh, and it's these pictures, they're moving 24 frames per second, and he goes through the whole thing. I've heard this before. I know the 24 frames per second and everything, but it was fascinating to hear them just like break it down. It was almost like behind the scenes featurettes were built into the movie itself.
It's true. Maybe that's why like the awards, they love movies about movies, because it's just like, oh, if people finally get to see what we go through to make our craft or something. It's just like really showcasing your stuff out there. But I got to change subjects a little bit here, and
you son of a
what? Oh my God, I just had it. What was I going to ask? Oh.
Brian's getting old.
I know, right? I got to write more stuff down.
No, go ahead.
Did his father know about the affair, and we'll say the emotional or physical, because did he know about that between his wife and his best friend for many, many years? Did he know that was going on? And then, when they moved to California, that was like him finally putting his foot down. Maybe that's when it got physical or something. It's not entirely clear. But did he know that throughout?
I think it was implied that his father wasn't a big rough and tumble guy. He wasn't the guy who's going to punch out the person having an affair with his wife. So I think it's implied, it shows like, oh, why did he accept those jobs? Like the first time they moved, because they moved twice, I think, in the movie. First time they move away, and his wife convinces him to get a job for, was it Uncle
Bernie. Benny. Sorry, Benny.
Uncle Benny, yeah, of course, Benny, aka Seth Rogen, and he continues living with them. And it isn't until you realize later on, alongside Sammy Fabelman, when he sees that family video for the first time, he's like, oh, that's why she wanted him to come along, because even at that point, they had a connection. And so when they make the big move to California, when he goes to work at IBM, that conversation in the car where they have to pull over because Mitzi's upset, he says something, he makes some kind of passive aggressive comments, but I think it lets you know it's like one of the reasons he took that job and moved away was specifically to that was his version of punching out his wife's lover. Is like, no, I'm gonna do it peaceful, but I was like, no, I'm gonna move across the country, far away from you, where you can't be together. Of course, it doesn't work in the end, but I think it was implied that I don't know when he knew, but I think the whole thing about him asking Sammy to make that video, to edit together that film from the camp, was part of his strategy to kind of woo his wife back to him. Right? Yeah. So I think by that point he knew for sure, or if he didn't know for sure, he had an inkling that there was something going on between them. But definitely by the time they move out to California, that's one of the reasons he takes that job, because he's like, oh, I'm not sure whether I'm going to take it, whether it's right for the family or whatever. But then he takes it, and Benny does not come along, specifically because he's trying to protect his relationship and his family.
Yeah. And that was where I think she even said again, it's like, well, you got to bring him along, like find him a job. He's like, no, he's gone far enough along. Like he has to make it himself now. Almost talking about him like he's a child. It's just like, I'm not protecting him anymore. Yeah. He's got to do this himself.
Well, I think even in the film, Benny at a certain point when he's going away and he's trying to give Sammy that camera as a gift, and Sammy is understandably, he's upset with him. He doesn't want to take anything from this man who's, essentially part of the reason eventually the family breaks up. But even Benny says like, yeah, your dad is way smarter than me. He's going places. I can't follow along. I'm where he recognizes his own kind of limitations, kind of career wise, maybe intellectually. So I think that's kind of clearly stated. To what degree is that Spielberg throwing shade at the guy who helped break up his family?
Yeah, I don't know. A good point.
But because you got everything, you still have to take things with a grain of salt. It's not purely autobiographical. It's not a documentary.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to lose sight of that when you're watching this, because it's just like, oh my goodness, I'm watching a Spielberg like show us his own life, and it's like, no, this is still a fictionalized story. It's I've seen that
certain parts are going to be embellished, right? So I think it's not that it's a bad thing, but you have to. But I think because Spielberg is such a great filmmaker, you forget that it's like, oh, this is not absolute truth. This is his recollection, and he's filtering it through his own experiences. So of course, like there's a couple people in there, like that one bully he still gets shade thrown at him, and like he doesn't get a redemption arc, even though the other bully does. Yeah. So like there's still some people I'm sure he's throwing shade at.
Oh yeah. So that kind of brings me to one of the early criticisms I read online of the movie in some reviews. I don't know if this is a shared criticism, but it was saying The Fabelmans is more of a collection of memories than it is like necessarily a big cohesive like story. And I found this interesting because it was almost the exact same criticism from War of the Worlds back in like 2005 or whatever movie came out, is that they said, listen, Spielberg can make a killer scene, but he's losing his touch and bringing together an entire movie, right? I'm like, wow, that's pretty harsh. It's like War of the Worlds. Yeah, it's not the best movie out there, but it's easy to say, yes, every single scene is like mastered. Like it's almost perfect, but maybe together they're not. And then to see the same kind of criticism thrown out at The Fabelmans, but very different types of movies. Like, did you get a sense of that?
Grasping at straws,
right?
It is very kind of like, yeah, it's episodic in terms of like it's kind of jumping between different parts of Sammy Fabelman's life, and Sammy Fabelman is a very obvious stand-in for Spielberg himself. But like there are clear narrative through lines throughout the whole movie. There's a very clear narrative direction,
right?
And all these narrative threads get resolved. Like the whole thing with that we've been talking about with his parents and their relationship, and with Benny and like that kind of love triangle and them being broken up. That's carried through the whole movie, almost right to the very end.
I thought for the type of movie it was kind of perfect. It was just like, this is very typical structure of a story told over like 8 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just an interesting criticism because I really can't think of much else to criticize the movie on. I'm not sure if you had any hangups on the movie, anything that kind of irked you a little bit.
No, I didn't think it was, again, spoilering the the ratings at the end. I think it was perfect. I think later Spielberg, this film felt a little bit sanitized in the way it was shot and the way things are depicted. I think that started to get that feeling. Like, you look at the difference between the original Indiana Jones movies and the Crystal Skull, and like I'm trying to articulate this, but like, people just don't seem as dirty and as sweaty in the newer movies.
Everything's more clean.
It seems a bit more like Hollywood set-esque. Well, like watching Jaws last night, unless like their hairstyles like weren't super like fashionable, or like they were like their hair was all messed up in the wind, and they were like kind of unshaven and unkempt, and like really they look like real people. And now you look at Spielberg, and not just Spielberg, but I think a lot of movies, they look like actors in a movie. Nobody's grungy or dirty. This one, I kind of forgive it a little bit more because the Fabelmans is more of like almost like a fairy tale of his. Of his, it's got a very dreamlike quality of his, because he's obviously reminiscing about his own life and his own experiences and his own philosophies about filmmaking and life and family in general. I wonder if the sensibilities of a younger Spielberg would have made more dynamic shots, or would have made the characters dirtier, or made things messier. I don't know.
I think part of that may come from the budgets and stuff too. Like, even in the 80s, Spielberg would still struggle to get money. Like, Jaws was a struggle to make, and it's like they were pushing the boundaries of financing. And I think a lot of that is true throughout the 70s and 80s, and probably after the 90s, it's just like, okay, this guy's going to make us money no matter what. He's going to get whatever budget he needs. But I'll give you one guess on how much money what the budget on the Fabelmans it was.
I get one. What if I get it wrong?
One, you get it wrong, you're out.
You're off the podcast. I'm gonna say $60 million.
Close. It was $40 million. And I think that was gonna
be my first guess. Oh, why? I pumped it up because of inflation.
In an age of massive, like $100 million, $200 million budgets, I would have thought, yeah, they'd give Spielberg $150 million to film this movie, and it looks great. I mean, it's a period piece, and everything looked great. Yeah. And for $40 million, this guy knows how to put together a movie. I was really shocked at how, quote unquote, low that budget was, and with how, I mean, this is like a 2.5 hour long movie, and it looks fantastic from beginning to end. Everything about it was great.
Yeah, it looks, especially like it's a period piece, so they got all like the period cars and everything, and the clothing, and I don't know, like if it's all CG or if you're like to what degree the sets are practical and everything. Like when you're walking down the street and you're seeing like the old stores and the mom and pop little places and everything, like whatever it was. I don't know if it was like, was it 50s style diners and everything? Like it felt like you were transported back into that time, right?
Everything felt legitimate, but going back to your point of like everything was a little dirtier, and like, just for me, it felt more lived in the 80s. It's like, look at Spielberg's own Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where
yes,
like their house is full of stuff, and it's like, that looks like a real house. Like, it looks really lived. Every object in there has a story, and you don't get that sense out of the Fabelmans. It's just like, things are a little cleaner in their houses, and it's like, we're talking about 10-year-old kids, and it's just like their bedrooms are kind of like perfectly designed type of thing. There's not a lot of clutter going around, so the set dressing isn't as good as it is. But I think it is kind of like almost a side effect of modern movies, is that's just kind of how it is.
Things do feel like just a lot more like clean. Like, you look at the action stars now, and like by the end of the movie, like their hair is fine. Like, there's not a smudge on their face.
Yeah.
And you look at like Die Hard, or you look at, Jaws, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or Jurassic Park, where they're just like look at Jurassic Park versus any of the Jurassic World movies. At the end, they're like, they're filthy from head to toe. They got cuts on them. Their clothes are all ripped up. New one, like every scene looks like their clothes came fresh out of like dry cleaners, and they're all pressed, and like you can see the seams still in all their clothes. Every single scene, even after a big action scene, not a speck of dirt on anybody's faces, not a single bead of sweat anywhere. And it's just, it's definitely a mark of modern storytelling more, but yeah, I don't even know if it's like it could be just personal preference too. With
Oh yeah,
it could be just like I'm grasping at straws here. You asked me for criticism, and I'm
it's
trying
tough
to
to find
something.
one. And
Yeah.
in this one, I like to come up with little excuses for random things in movies like that, and be like, well, you know what? His father was probably really pretty well off for, like, working in modern technology and like working for IBM. It's just like, it would make sense that they have new clothes all the time. It's just like his kids, they're not poor and destitute like they are. They're well taken care of. Like, they're affording to buy the editing hardware and stuff and developing all the film. Like, it all is kind of like family finance there.
Yeah, it felt like it was kind of a neat too watching them, and you get the sense of like your own kind of family. Like when, especially as an older, I was the eldest of 4 children. I am the eldest of 4 children. We're all still alive. Yes. But like, being young enough to remember, parents having to struggle for this. And then you're like, then you get a couple brothers and sisters and you move into a bigger house. Your dad gets promotion. And to feel that kind of represented in the movie where like, you get that sense, that kind of familiar middle-class story of, you start off in a smaller house and then, dad gets a big promotion. They move to another town, get a bigger house. And then like when they goes to work in California at IBM, and it's like, this is like really nice house and like that kind of middle-class trajectory. And I think Spielberg really captured that as well. And that speaks to the narrative trajectory as well, right? Where to say the people or for people to say that, great scenes, but no through lines. Like, no, like I saw myself, reflected in that kind of family journey, right? I think a lot of people will say like the middle class, probably that's a pretty typical kind of arc, right? Where like, parents start off 1-bedroom apartment and then somebody gets their career taken off. And then like all of a sudden it's like, and you get that feeling of almost progression, right?
Yeah. The only other, it's not even really a criticism against the movie, I just thought was kind of funny, is that Sammy, in making his films, doesn't really face any criticism on the quality of the films he puts together or anything. And it's like, his father's not really super supportive about it. It's just like, he always says, that's a hobby of yours. He doesn't take it too seriously. But the technical side, and when he shows the movies, everyone is loving it as like, is this Spielberg really like stroking his own ego here? It's just like, even when I was a kid, I was doing perfect films. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's got to be, maybe subconsciously or unconsciously, there's a little bit of that. Cause like in the movie, like all of Sammy's films, like everybody looks at him like, you're a genius.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I'm just like, okay, Spielberg, we get it.
But on the other hand, I totally understand that's not the focus of the movie. The focus is on his family and a relationship with his parents. And it's just like, but I thought that was just like a funny aside for the film.
I think there may have been some effective story beats to have somebody like, this didn't like show a film and people are like, this kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Like, and then he comes back and then to kind of overcome that. But he had other stuff to overcome where it was that being torn between, like, are you going to focus on your art and dedicate yourself to your art? If that's your calling, then you're going to sacrifice relationships with family and people you love. So that was the struggle he went through. But I think that's a genuine criticism, whether he did it consciously or unconsciously. Everything Spielberg Jr. in the film did was amazing.
Yeah.
But I think that's a legit criticism for sure.
So I don't really have anything else to add to the film before we get into our actual ratings, which I mean, we've kind of hinted at earlier. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I will say I didn't realize how much I was enjoying the movie until it ended. Yeah. It kind of ended almost abruptly. And I was like, I wanted more. I didn't realize 2.5 hours had passed already. I was waiting for the next act in his life. Yeah. But that meeting after he meets director John Ford, which I think was based on a real meeting.
Yes.
A great little final meeting where he goes and he goes to apply for a job just as like a hired hand on a TV show behind the scenes. And he's just like, I just want to do whatever it takes to get into the industry. And the dude is like, you don't want to make TV after talking to him for a couple minutes. You don't want to be in TV. You want to make movies. It's like, and Fabelman's like, well, I want to do whatever. Like, you want to make movies. I can tell.
Yeah.
Listen, this is a guy I want you to meet. He's in movies. He might give you he's not going to meet long, but like, and it turns out to be John Ford.
Yeah. Who is played by David Lynch, of all people. The director, David Lynch? Yeah. Oh. Which was just like, I forgot. I did have a note to ask. How was the David Lynch casting? spot on. I got that whole
Spot
scene was
on.
fantastic.
Yeah, and he goes in and he's look at the painting or whatever on the wall, or they, I don't know if there were screenshots or if there were paintings. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But he described that to me, and he's
Yeah.
like, "There's men and they're on horseback. No, look, where's the horizon?"
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the horizon's at the top of the picture. Goes another one. It's like, describe this one to me. And Sammy Fabelman goes, "Oh, well, these guys are camped out at night, and there's no, where's the horizon?" Like, "Oh, it's at the bottom of the frame. Like, look at this picture over here." And he goes to the spiel. He's like, "Look at the horizon. It's in the middle." He's like, "Okay, horizon at the top of the frame, great shot. Horizon at the bottom of the frame, great shot. Horizon in the middle, fucking garbage." And like that, it's like there's something so simple that stuck with Spielberg, but like, but it made me want to watch. And I love that last shot where the camera kind of adjusts so that the horizon, it changes place in the frame. Now I want to go back and watch Spielberg's movies to see where the horizon is.
Yeah, that's right.
In the frame. I guess like the larger lesson, of course, was that it was, having the more dynamic framing of shots, whereas like, don't go for the simple straight ahead shot. Like, find different ways to frame it. So, like to tell that story, how framing essentially the shot helps to tell the story. But it's such a great little anecdote that, like, I hope to God that was word for word a true story about how he met John Ford one time. I really hope that's exactly how it went.
Oh, that was really good. That was it was a good way to finish the film too, honestly. It's just like I feel like some movies like this would struggle to find like a good ending point for it. And that seemed like a good ending point for you. You got to know this is everyone's familiar with the rest of Spielberg's career. And as a stand-in, I mean, even though this is kind of a fictionalized story, it's like, he's going to do great things afterwards. Like, you don't have to worry about this kid.
So it was great. It's like, you realize, even though I wanted more, it was like, no, we understand that sets him off on the trajectory. He got a taste of his dream, and that gave him the motivation to keep following his dream for the rest of his life, to become the Spielberg we all know and love today, or the Fabelman we all know and love today. Speaking of subtlety, even the name of his stand-in family, the Fabelmans, not subtle at all, but it still works. It's great. It's obvious. It's obvious in the most. It's obvious in the best possible way.
Listen, is this a perfect 5-star movie for you?
I don't think so. I think originally I gave it a 4, but it's probably a 4.5 for me.
Yeah.
I don't think it's Spielberg's best work, but again, and the conceit of Hollywood filmmakers making movies about making movies. Listen, for me, that's not a sell for me. That's a hurdle that you have to overcome, because there's so many movies now about making movies.
Yeah.
I don't care. Honestly, as somebody watching movies now, is like, you telling stories about you telling stories, like that's not a selling point to me. That's a speed bump that you have to overcome with an even better movie.
That's a good point.
But sitting down to this, even though it was Spielberg, I wasn't holding out a lot of hope. For some reason, I haven't learned my lesson after watching this guy for 40 years.
Never doubt Spielberg.
Never doubt Spielberg. I knew from that last frame when the movie ended, and I wanted more. I knew this was amazing. Like, Spielberg just comes out against all his critics and just like flexes. It's like he just puts out an amazing movie, like somebody else might blow their nose. It's like it's so easy. It seems he makes it look so easy.
Yeah.
It's not 100% perfect, but I think after talking with you, I think I'm going to bump it up to 4.5 out of 5. Still amazing movie. I think it's one of the better ones. I think this is top tier Spielberg.
It is without a doubt top tier Spielberg. And to be perfectly fair, like, I was not expecting a lot out of this movie because I haven't been watching a lot of his movies recently. Like, honestly, like, I know. And I mean, we talked about it earlier, but like Ready Player One was kind of a stinker. And he's only made one other movie between that and this one. I mean, West Side Story, and it was a remake of another movie. So it's like, how did he lose his touch over the past, 5 years now? And so you go in with a bit of trepidation, and then like Spielberg just hits you in the face with those film reels, and you're like, wow, that was really good. And I didn't know what to rate this movie as. Just like, is that a perfect 5-star movie? For me, I didn't feel it. I gave it 4.5 stars, but you know what? It's that podcast discussion effect. It's like, this probably is a 5-star film. Like, there's no reason for me not to rate it 5 stars, but here we are talking about ratings that I always tell people mean nothing anyways. So 4.5 stars for me, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of the people who have this on their top 10 lists of the year for 2022, and I'm going to say with good reason. It's a fantastically well-made film. It's got a lot of heart, incredibly personal story told by one of our generation's greatest filmmakers and storytellers. Yeah, it's all around a great film. I don't know, we were nitpicking some details earlier, and it is just nitpicky details. But Spielberg is he's one of those rare talents in any industry. You think about who has staying power to keep putting out some of their best work in their 70s and 80s. Like who does that? Very few people in the film industry. Like Scorsese and Spielberg are kind of the only two. And then David Cronenberg recently, he put out one of his best movies with Crimes of the Future. But like, this is to have that staying power to keep making movies and to be as influential as like Spielberg and George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and like that whole era of filmmakers who really jump-started what we think of today as like the modern film era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And have them have some of those people still going strong today, 50 plus years onward, and still telling amazing, engaging stories. Like it would be amazing if I could do what I'm doing today in my career as good or better in my 70s. I can tell you, I am not one of those exceptional people. That will not happen.
There's no way I'm going to be working into my 70s. I'll just tell you that right now.
And if I were, there's no way I'd be putting out high quality content. I just like to think of it. It is really amazing, not just that this movie came out, but that this movie came out 50 years after. Like Jaws was 1975, right? So we're coming up on 50 years since Jaws, and he's still got an incredible batting average. And even like his lowest film, Ready Player One, for me was like I think I ranked it like 3 out of 5 stars. So like that's
it's still up.
For me. It's still even the worst Spielberg is still like people. There are people in the industry who would kill to have their best movie be on par with Steven Spielberg's worst movie.
Right.
Any filmmaker would be so lucky.